Welcome to Nelson's Video Conversations, the place where we have conversations with interesting people. My name is Bob Nelson, and today's guest is someone that nobody wants to talk to, but at some time in our lives, most of us will need to. He's a funeral director, and his name is Bill Buckley, and he's the owner of Care Funeral Services. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bob.
Well, none of us is getting out of this life alive, so I guess it's a good idea that we get to know someone in the funeral business, since it's a lot easier to deal with someone you know when the time comes that you actually need to. So let's talk a little bit so that our viewers can get to know you a little better. So tell me, whatever possessed you to actually, what was your motivation actually to start a funeral business?
Well, I had been involved with the industry behind the scenes. I had operated a transfer service, which is moving bodies for the industry from various and sundry places. And I had a limousine service, and so I did a lot of work for them. And one day one of the funeral home owners said to me, you should have a transfer service. So I did that and ended up with a coroner's contract, and I just slowly worked my way into it all. And then a friend of mine who had been with First Memorial from its inception on Vancouver Island, his name was David Murphy. He and I, after he'd retired, got talking, and we decided there was room for another funeral home, and so we started this one in 1990. And after about 6 months, he came to me and said, you know what, I came out of retirement for this, and I just got no interest in getting out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning anymore. So you need to buy me out. So I did.
Okay, so 1990. So you've been in business for 24 years now.
Quarter of a century.
You're old.
I know. Don't remind me.
So in all that time, you've been in the business a long time. Is there anything that you have learned from being in the business that you feel like is sort of your most important takeaway from it?
Well, I've learned a lot of things. For example, I'm not going to understand people in this life, maybe the next, but not this life. But that's probably not what you're looking for. I think if you understand, or what you should understand, is that the funeral industry is a relatively young industry. It didn't exist 200 years ago. If you'd had a death in your family 200 years ago, you were dealing with it. You didn't hand it off to a guy like me. So the industry is a service industry. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to look after and make life easier for people. So if you distill it down to its most basic common denominator, I am persuaded that this is all about people's feelings. If nobody had feelings, I'd be unemployed.
All right. So, do you feel like you sort of had to learn to become a little bit more of a psychologist type of a person when you're dealing with people, to be able to understand their feelings and stuff?
Well, I just think, I don't think you have to understand their feelings. I mean, you have to understand what motivates people, and feelings motivate people. My grandmother died. My mother died when I was very young, so my dad died not so long ago. So, I mean, when I've lived through those experiences, I can relate reasonably well to the kind of things that people are looking at dealing with. So you don't have to be a psychologist, you just have to have a bit of empathy, I think.
Okay. So have you seen over the years that you've been in the business any changes in the industry?
Yeah, there's substantial changes, really. Probably the biggest one would be the increase in the percentage of cremation. In the last 25 years, we've probably gone from, I'm going to guess, 60-something to 40-something. 60% cremation to 40% burial, to where it is now at about 90%, 10% burial, 90% cremation.
Okay. And do you have any clue as to why that is?
You know, that's a challenging question that I've given a lot of thought to. I can tell you, it might help you to understand, when I got involved with the industry, I had no second thoughts at all. I was convinced I would be cremated. I've now seen the process from both sides. I've seen all there is to know about cremation, watched it completely, The burial, I watched that completely. I've exhumed, so I know at the end of the day what it all boils down to. And after about 10 years of being in the business, I went and bought myself a plot. So it tells you that, we can change our thinking process, and mine changed to the point where I'm going to be buried now. And if you asked me why specifically, I would have to say, I can't tell you specifically. I can only tell you that I have learned to trust my feelings, and that's how I feel.
Okay, well, that's fascinating. So, what makes a service that you offer different from the service offered by your competitors? Well, there are a lot of funeral homes, and so...
There are. I would have to say one of the things that has me stand out a little bit is my belief system. Now, I'm convinced that it really doesn't matter what we believe. A fact is a fact. A truth is a truth. What's going to happen is going to happen. But the fact that I believe what I believe has me dealing with the deceased differently and more carefully than I have seen others do. I think when you watch somebody who thinks that it's all over but the crying and there's nothing going on behind the scenes, they're not quite as careful as I am. Somebody who believes that maybe somebody's keeping an eye on this process. And I've got no intention or interest in having little Miss Smith come up next to me at the judgment bar and condemning me for anything. I got enough other problems.
Now, I have been a client of yours for, I think, 6 times? 5 times? At least 5, yeah.
Huh.
And
Lucky you.
I am. And so we have some experience with this, and you neglected to mention what's different about you. One of the things that I know is different about Bill is his prices.
Yes.
So, and I know your competitors don't like hearing this, and you don't like to flaunt it too much, but you developed a business model that allows you to charge significantly less than the standard rates that most other funeral providers offer.
Mm-hmm.
So where did that idea come from? Was that sort of one of the fundamental things when you started the business?
Well, when David and I started, we had a 2-price system. He had come from First Memorial, and at the time, they had a 2-price system. If you were a member of the society, you got a break. If you weren't a member of the society, you paid the street price or full freight. And I never liked that idea because in my mind what it did was it penalized somebody for not preparing. And granted, we should all be prepared for things in life, but some things creep up on you, and sometimes life's had to throw surprises at you. And so I didn't like the idea of having to charge people more if they hadn't prepared. So when I bought him out, I changed that policy to one where everybody paid the same price, whether you're prepared or not. And I tried to make that price as competitive as I could, and in fact it was lower than their price at the time, and still is. But I did that with the idea and the understanding that I've got overhead, but if I can create enough volume, I make a little bit on quite a number of people, I'm better off ultimately than making a lot of money off 1 or 2 people.
Okay. So,
and it keeps people coming back.
It does do that. Now, so who are your, you deal with all kinds of people, so, and I know that you have some people who really love your service. And I know I've heard you talk about this, so I got to ask you because I'm wanting to get this little story out of you. So, what kind of people are the ones who really like dealing with care funeral services?
The ones that really, really like me are people that have got something to compare it with. Somebody that has been somewhere else to another funeral provider. I've had people walk out of other places and come and see me and say they felt like they were dealing with a car salesman in a black suit. I wore my black suit. Oh no. Anyway.
Me too.
But obviously, when you make that statement, you felt like you were dealing with a car salesman in a black suit, there was some pretty hard selling. I mean, that's what a car salesman's doing. He's selling you. Well, part of the challenge, and again, one of the things that makes me a little different than the majority, is I have no commissioned salespeople. So I'm not trying to upsell you. Now, the guy at some of these other funeral homes that's on commission, he's having to feed his family, he's wanting to look after himself. And unfortunately, with that dynamic, he tends to want to look after himself first and then look after the client. And that's a bit of a challenge for me. That doesn't leave the consumer quite as well off emotionally as they can be.
So, I have a question, because I know we've in our family we've had both burials and cremations, and typically with cremations, how often do people actually keep the ashes in an urn? How often do they scatter them?
Well, I met a family this morning, and Dad has just died, and Mom died quite a number of years ago. We looked after her, and so the kids said to me, "Well, not sure what we're going to do about an urn." And I said, "Well, what are you thinking of doing with the remains?" He said, "Well, we're going to scatter them at some point in time, but I'm probably going to end up keeping them for a while, so I probably want something more than just a cardboard box." And anyway, he said, "We've still got Mom's. She's in the closet, so we'll have to do something with her at the same time we do with Dad." So I guess the answer to your question is, people are all different. They're going to do, different things. But there's a lot of people that have them sitting in their closets and trying to figure out when and what to do with them.
Right. So you said, so if we were scattering them, would you recommend just keep taking them in the cardboard box then, as opposed to going and spending the money on an urn?
Yes and no. It depends on how you're envisioning that playing out. For example, a friend of mine who is a mariner by trade and has been for quite a number of years, everybody and his dog has petitioned him over the years to scatter ashes at sea for them. And he's done so. Anyway, his wife passed away, and he came to see me, and when I had asked him what he was going to do with the remains, he said he was going to scatter them at sea. And so I pointed out something that's called a journey envelope to him, and I said, "You may want to consider this. It's biodegradable, and it's a pretty slick operation." So at the end of the arrangement, he said, "You know what?" He said, "I think I'm going to take one of those." So he took one, and a couple of weeks later, I was talking to him and asked him how things went with scattering his wife. And he said, "That is the best thing that I've ever seen," he said. "It was slick as you said."
What is it?
It's a biodegradable envelope, and believe it or not, it comes from New Mexico. How much water they got there, I don't know. But anyway, it comes from New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And what you do is you take the cremains and you put it in a biodegradable bag, and the bag goes inside of an envelope. And the envelope you put on the water, and it would float for 3-4 minutes, and then it tips and it sinks. And it releases the cremains below the water line. So people that have scattered at sea can tell you some horrendous stories about how the wind shifts and you're wearing granny and you're breathing granny, and the boat you're washing for the next week because granny's all over it, and so there's some real horror stories. But anyway, he said it was the best thing that he'd ever come across. So to answer your question, yes and no. Again, for example, if you're doing a scattering, for example, with a lot of family around, a lot of kids around, maybe you'd want to consider having a tube, and the tube is a scattering tube, and it just makes the process look a whole lot more dignified and classier than just the cardboard box with a plastic bag. So if you're all by yourself and then you don't have to worry about that sort of stuff, then yeah, cardboard's fine. But in life, I think we should try and ask ourselves why we're doing what we're doing.
Excellent. Well, that's some excellent information. I think you got a really good feel for who this guy is. Bill Buckley, Care Funeral Services. I hope you don't ever need to talk to him, but sooner or later we all will. So when the time comes, he's the guy to talk to. You can go and visit his website at carefuneral.com or visit him on Facebook at facebook.com/carefuneral, or he has a blog. So go and visit him if you need to talk to somebody who is kind and thoughtful and will do a great job for you and not charge you the earth. Go see Bill. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation today.